Well, good evening, everyone. I'm from the southwest of France. A very warm welcome to this evening's webinar on the journey of soul initiation with Bill Plotkin. And before I just say a little bit about Bill, I'm going to read a passage from his book. This is his book that's just come out called The Journey of Soul Initiation, a field guide for visionaries, evolutionaries, and revolutionaries. It's a very in detail book. And he says something here in the section called 21st Century Practices for Soul Initiation. He says, because of the cataclysmic events now playing out, mass extinctions, deforestation, ecological poisoning and degradation, overpopulation, climate disruption, we find ourselves having to make an evolutionary leap of a magnitude we may not have needed since we climbed down from our homes in the trees some 4 million years ago. This leap might not have been possible without our having unwittingly created the conditions in which it is necessary. This is the way evolution works. The species that survive are the ones that are able to adapt to changing conditions. In this case, we ourselves have created unintentionally the conditions that require us to evolve. And so we're on a knife edge, and I think that's a brilliant analysis of where we are. So as Bill says, we've inadvertently created this evolutionary test for ourselves, and will we pass it? We will see. So Bill is a wilderness guide, an eco-depth psychologist. He asked me to make sure that this webinar took place in April because my original date in June, he said he'd probably be in the wilderness leading some sort of initiation, so he wouldn't be available. And he calls himself an agent of cultural regeneration. And my goodness, don't we need that? He's the founder of Colorado's Animas Valley Institute. And since 1980, he's guided thousands of women and men on the journey of soul initiation. His previous books are Soulcraft, Nature and the Human Soul, and Wild Mind. And he signs off his greetings with the word wild in it. And so it's really very nice to have you here on our platform, Bill. Very warm welcome. And we look forward to your talk. And I'll hand over to you now, Bill.
Thank you so much, David. Very excited to be here with you. I appreciate the invitation. And it's great to be with all you fellow mystics and scientists. So I'm going to start with a poem. And I might say this is for the mystic in all of us to get at the heart, or maybe I should be saying the soul of the matter, indirectly the way poetry does. So in some ways, the mystic will get everything he or she or they need through this poem. It's a piece by David White, the Irish, English, now American, living in America poet. And it's his poem, All the True Vows. And let me invite you to close your eyes if you're somebody who can sink into poetry and non-ordinary states more easily that way. Up to you. So, all the true vows are secret vows. The ones we speak out loud are the ones we break. There's only one life you can call your own, and 1,000 others you can call by any name you want. There's only one life you can call your own, and 1,000 others you can call by any name you want. Hold to the truth you make every day with your own body. Don't turn your face away. Hold to the truth you make every day with your own body. Don't turn your face away. Hold to your own truth at the center of the image you were born with. The truth at the center of the image you were born with. Those who do not understand their destiny will never understand the friends they have made, nor the work they have chosen, nor the one life that waits beyond all the others. Those who do not understand their destiny will never understand the friends they have made, nor the work they have chosen, nor the one life that waits beyond all the others. By the lake, in the wood, in the shadows, you can whisper that truth to the quiet reflection you see in the water. By the lake, in the wood, in the shadows, you can whisper that truth. I'll remind you, the truth you make every day with your own body, the truth at the center of the image you were born with. You can whisper that truth to the quiet reflection you see in the water. Whatever you hear from the water, remember, it wants you to carry the sound of its truth on your lips. Remember, it wants you, the water wants you to carry the sound of its truth, of that truth on your lips. Remember, in this place, no one can hear you. And out of the silence, you can make a promise it will kill you to break. Remember, in this place, by the lake, in the wood, in the shadows, you can make a promise it will kill you to break. That way, you'll find what is real and what is not. I know what I'm saying. Time almost forsook me, and I looked again. Seeing my reflection, I broke a promise and spoke for the first time after all these years in my own voice, before it was too late to turn my face again. Seeing my reflection, I broke a promise and spoke for the first time after all these years in my own voice, before it was too late to turn my face again. So let's see, there's two promises in this poem. And the first one corresponds to what I call soul initiation. It's a kind of promise that it will kill us to break. Maybe there's lots of kinds of promise it will kill us to break, but this is one of the kinds. And it's the way the poet says it, it's the promise that we will carry on our lips the sound of the truth that we make every day with our own bodies, that is at the center of the image we were born with. And these are typical ideas for the Western world, although for mystics, they might seem very familiar, that there's some non-linguistic way, you might say pre-cultural or maybe even trans-cultural way that our bodies make a certain kind of truth. And there's this idea we find in many traditions that each of us is born with something like an image. It's not words, it's an image. And there's a truth at the center of that image, a non-linguistic or pre-linguistic truth. And so I'm going to be talking today about the journey of soul initiation, but here we have the poet giving us some images for this passage of soul initiation, which of course is what the journey completes itself with. The second promise in this poem is the one that virtually all of us, maybe we can just say, yeah, probably all of us have made when we were very, very young. And that's the promise that not to speak in our own true voice, our own deep voice, because of the kind of trouble it would stir up for ourselves if we did. So when we're young, especially in the kind of societies we live in now, we tend to have made that promise that I will trade my psychosocial, I will, in order to get my psychosocial safety, or at least more than I would have otherwise, I'll promise in a certain way to be inauthentic, not speak in my true voice. While we go through this first hour, I want to invite you to take any notes you'd like, and maybe even on something I've said. But more important is to take notes on yourself. Like if you notice something deep inside of you, maybe something we might call the muse, whispering some important things to you, reminding you of something, then that would be especially a good idea to take notes on. Okay, just a little bit of background about me. In the mid-70s, I began my training as a psychologist, so both a research psychologist and a clinical psychologist. And it was in the 70s, and it was in the United States, and it was me. And so I especially leaned towards studying the more progressive developments in psychology, which at the time were humanistic, transpersonal, and depth psychology. And those, I guess, are still kind of relatively progressive realms, with the addition now of eco-psychology. And then I began my work as both a psychotherapist and as a wilderness-based guide to initiation processes. And what I found pretty soon was that even the models and the practices that I had learned in these areas of psychology weren't adequate. They were missing some really major elements, especially when it comes to understanding human development, human spirituality, and our connection to the greater Earth community. There was just, and I've discovered that not so much through rational thinking, but through guiding people, especially in wilderness programs, and discovering which kind of people are ready for what I call the journey of soul initiation and which aren't, and what's the differences between them. And I ended up creating my own developmental map of the stages of life as seen through nature's eyes, if you will, or soul's eyes. And that's in my book, Nature and the Human Soul. So what I'm going to do today is share with you some of the maps and frameworks, at least a couple of them anyways, that I ended up learning basically from the natural world and from the people, the courageous people who I had the good fortune and privilege to guide over the past 40 years. Okay, so the first model, okay, I have to admit, is actually not such a new one. It's actually, we find it in cultures all over the world. But I've come to understand it a little bit better, and I call it the three worlds map. And we might call that the upper world, middle world, and the lower world, or the underworld. And this idea of these three worlds, we as I say, we find in many different traditions. The upper world, as I've come to understand it, is basically the world of the divine, of the mystery, of the one, of the non-dual, and it represents essentially one half of what I consider spirituality to be. But when I was younger, it was the only realm of spirituality that I had any introduction to. It's the half of spirituality that goes upward towards the one, or the divine. The middle world is, you can say, the world of the ego, by which I mean our everyday consciousness and our everyday lives, our village life, the life of work and play and raising kids, and hopefully doing whatever we can to turn the tide of the moment on this planet. And the underworld is, for me, among other things, okay, more generally, the underworld is what we would call the unconscious. But when it comes to spirituality, the underworld is the realm of soul, which is a complementary realm to the upper world of the absolute, or of spirit, or of mystery. So I've come to think of the upper world spirituality as the universal transpersonal. The universal transpersonal. Everybody, that we merge into this one consciousness, and we're all the same in essence, in terms of our upper world spirituality. But in terms of our underworld spiritualities, we're all quite unique. So I call that the individual transpersonal. And still transpersonal, which of course means beyond the personal, in the sense that it's beyond the ego. The soul is non-egoic every bit as much as spirit is. And one way to sew it all back together, you can say a mature ego is one that has recognized itself as an agent for soul, or a handmaiden for soul, and every soul is an agent for mystery. And I haven't given you my definition of soul yet. That's coming up. So the journey of soul initiation is an underworld excursion. And if I haven't said it yet, there's no competition or conflict between underworld and upper world spiritualities. They're actually complementary. And I believe any person's spiritual development is not complete unless we have cultivated both the underworld and upper world spirituality. Okay, I'll attempt to say what do I mean by the journey of soul initiation? First, I might have to say some things about what it isn't, because it's pretty much totally off the map of Western psychology, maybe even off of the map of most of Western mystery traditions. Let me say it this way, that the journey of soul initiation is a process of at least several years that I believe every healthy, intact, mature human culture that has ever existed has had some version of it or something like it. And every human society of the future that is life-sustaining or ideally life-enhancing will have something like it. But it disappeared from our Western traditions thousands of years ago. And even when we find things that look like it, I think it's likely it's often misinterpreted about what it actually is. The primary event or goal that happens during the journey of soul initiation is what I call soul encounter, which is an experience of our soul. But so probably now would be a good time for me to tell you what I mean by soul. As a psychologist and a spiritually oriented person, for years I attempted to adopt definitions or ways of using the word soul in various spiritualities, both Western and Eastern, and Middle Eastern. And also it's found in psychology, and none of them quite worked for me. And finally, I had this epiphany, I don't know, 20 or so years ago, that soul really ought to be understood primarily as an ecological concept, not primarily psychological or spiritual. And the definition is very simple. And here it is, the soul of anything, because everything, this definition has a soul. The soul of anything is its unique ecological niche. It's as if, soul is really a psychological or spiritual way of talking about ecological niche. And some people, when they hear that definition, have accused me, usually in a very friendly way, of having changed the subject. Well, you just changed the topic, Bill. And I say, now, wait a minute. I know what you're saying, but hold on just a second. One of maybe the single most common connotation of the word soul, the way most people use it in any context, not all contexts, not all uses, but a very, very common connotation is that it's something that has depth, it's something that gives us meaning, that gives us purpose, that it's real. It's what is truly real. Isn't that the way I imagine you'd agree with me that that's a common way we use the word soul. So then I respond to you and say, what could give us more purpose or meaning or real reality other than or more than the place or the niche we were born to take in this lifetime? As far as, for me, nothing could give us greater meaning. And that's where our true purpose comes from. And that kind of meaning and purpose cannot be identified or defined in terms of any social role in any culture or any vocation or any craft or discipline or creative project. Because that's because we're born with it. For example, the truth at the center of the image we were born with, the truth that we make every day with our own bodies, including the day we're born, or even before we're born. So it's one of the things I love about this definition. It's mysterious, and it points to, as I say, our deepest meaning, our purpose. So the journey of soul initiation is an initiatory process of several years or more, in which we discover and are changed by a vision or a revelation of our unique ecological niche. But okay, it's a little more complicated than that. It always is. When we have this kind of vision or revelation, which I call a soul encounter, we're not literally getting anything like a download of ecological niches and relationships. Not literally. That the way our human psyche communicates to us our unique ecological niche, which is, say, our soul, is through metaphor. That's something we know about the human psyche, is we work so much through metaphor and imagination. So I've come to, my colleagues and I have ended up calling what we learn during a soul encounter as this, our mytho-poetic identity. It's a way our consciousness, our unconscious, our psyche, communicates to us through metaphor what our unique ecological niche is, what is our place to take it in the world. So maybe it would help if I quickly gave you an example. The easiest one for me is my own. I've had 4 soul encounters in my life. And the first one was when I was 29. Actually, I was 30. And it was on my first vision fast. And by the way, when a person does not need to do a vision fast in order to have a soul encounter, but it is a technology, if you will, a spiritual technology that's found all over the world as one way to bring about a soul encounter. In my book, the book is really full of stories of real people's journeys of soul initiation. Most of the stories are people I've guided over the last 40 years, but there's a few famous individuals, that Carl Jung, Joanna Macy, William Butler Yeats, and the depth psychologist Robert Johnson, at least some of them. Okay, so my first vision fast, which was high in the Colorado mountains, a tree line, 11,500 feet. I took myself out there with some bare bones instructions about how to enact a vision fast, and fasted for 4 days and nights. And by the 4th day, my consciousness was quite shifted, as everybody's would be under those circumstances, alone in very, very wild terrain, and fasting, and engaged in a series of ceremonies that who designed to deepen that non-ordinary state. And by that 4th day, about 30 feet or so from a lake at tree line, timber line, I was completely absorbed in watching a community of little mammals called pikas. They're like, you know, a quarter at most the size of a rabbit and related to rabbits. And they were busy gathering watercress and other herbs to help them to get through the coming winter. This was late August, which is early autumn at that altitude and latitude. And totally fascinated with these community, with the pikas and how good they were at spiritual gathering. And, but I'd also been hanging out with this spruce tree on the edge of the lake, who by the third day had revealed himself to me as actually a Zen monk. Zen being one of my first spiritual disciplines that made any sense to me. And the monk tree was in conversation with the beavers of the lake. And at one point he interrupted his conversation with the beavers and he made a gesture towards me with one of his arms. And he pointed towards another spruce tree to the left. And from that tree, a large yellow butterfly flew, and it flew towards me the way butterflies do, which is pretty indirect, and actually came right to me, and she brushed the left side of my face with one of her wings as she went by. And I heard in English, thanks to my muse, which translated for me, the words cocoon weaver. Just those two words, cocoon weaver. And my first reaction was, that's kind of interesting, but the pikas really are way more interesting. And then about a minute later, something broke free in my belly, and something like a wail came out of my mouth. And I realized that I had been shown something that was, now I would call it, the truth at the center of the image I was born with, something about weaving cocoons. Didn't know what it meant, had no idea. But something also started in that moment. And I compare it to a lightning strike, which I think is all soul encounters are, that because soul encounters are not primarily information, they are the start of a catalytic process or an alchemical process in which the adolescent ego is reshaped over a period of many months, if not longer, into an adult ego. And I'll do my best to define some of those terms as we go along. So that's an example of what I mean by a soul encounter. Again, the book has many, many other examples. They come in all kinds of different forms. Through my work, I've ended up with a lot of conclusions that to me feel really radical. I almost want to apologize for them. And maybe for a group like this, scientists and mystics, they won't seem so radical to you, but let me share some of them to you. And for me, they're the framework in which all of the work we do at Animus Valley Institute is held. The first one has to do with our global crises at this time. It seems it's almost irresponsible these days to talk about anything outside the context of what's going on this planet, because it's such a dire planetary evolutionary moment. And there's no need to list the various crises that we're in at this time. But I might summarize by saying the world is something like insane at this time. And all of us, I think every human can feel it somatically and in the depth of their psyches, even if they don't, not consciously in relationship to it. So the first radical conclusion I want to share with you is this one, that I've come to believe and come to be absolutely convinced that all of the major crises in the world today are at root due to arrested human development. Arrested human development. I've ended up calling it systemic human development oppression. systemic human development oppression. And the idea is that that oppression is at the root of all the other oppressions that we all know about, and there's so many of them. So let me pause here a moment to remind you of something from Rianne Eisler's book. Maybe you know that one, Chalice and the Blade, in which she reviewed the literature, the research on cultures around the world, and said, well, there's basically two kinds of cultures. There's cultures of the blade and cultures of the chalice. And she called the blade cultures dominator cultures, what she says, glorify the lethal power of the blade. And then partnership cultures, which is an older model, which used to be much more prevalent, which in partnership cultures revere the chalice, the life-generating and nurturing powers of the universe. The chalice, the life-generating and nurturing powers of the universe. So my reading of things is that over the last several thousand years, we've lost most of the partnership cultures, and for our own culture, Western culture was a partnership culture at one time. And we've lost these cultures, and we mostly have dominator cultures, which we might now also call industrialized, technocratic, synthetic, the overculture, and there's various kinds of words we use, the industrial growth society. And it's, we don't know, I don't know how many partnership cultures are left, but the vast majority in terms of numbers of humans are in dominator cultures now. Maybe an anthropologist like Wade Davis could say how many partnership cultures are left. But you wouldn't want to identify them. You wouldn't want to leave them alone. So as I say, I believe Western civilization lost the journey of soul initiation many thousands of years ago. And other dominator cultures, maybe only just a few hundred years ago. And because one thing that whenever a dominator culture invades and conquers a partnership society, that dominator society is going to be committing cultural genocide immediately and undermining the cultural integrity of the conquered people. One thing I like to do is when I introduce this to people is to say give you a few examples of what the journey of soul initiation is not, because just the phrase sounds familiar to us. It kind of resonates with us in some kind of way, at some kind of depth. But we all know how the human psyche works, that when we're introduced to something new, we automatically start this process inside ourselves with our strategic minds to identify what kind of thing that we already know about is this new thing a version of. So that's why I like to go through a quick list like this. The journey of soul initiation is not a rite of passage. That's one of the first things people think. This must be a rite of passage. It is absolutely not a rite of passage. It begins with a passage, whether or not we have a right to celebrate our ITE, to celebrate it, and it ends with a passage. But there's several years in between those passages, and that's the journey, is between the passages. It's not a Joseph Campbell version of a hero's journey. As you see here in a little bit, it's a very different kind of thing. It's not a vision fast. A vision fast is one practice that might be part of it. It's not a psychedelic trip or an entheogenic journey, although those can be part of it too. It is not Jungian analysis. It is not what Jungian analysts do. It's not shamanism. It is not a dark night of the soul. It's not a simple nature connection experience. It's definitely not a union with the divine, because that's upper world. And it's not a way to discover our social or vocational purpose. It's a way to discover and be changed by our mythopoetic identity. And then sometime afterwards, we begin to identify a social role or a career or a creative project as a way to deliver it or embody it. That's what we call a delivery system. Okay. The journey of soul initiation is not entirely lost because there are still partnership cultures that employ this kind of process, or at least remember it. But more to the point is that the journey of soul initiation is not lost because it's part of the structure of our human psyches. And even though the journey has fallen off Western maps many, many centuries ago, people still go through the experience. Not many, I would say 5 to 10% of people in dominator cultures at the most, but that's a lot of people who still go through the experience because the structure of it is in their psyches, because it's in all of our psyches. And you don't need a guide or a guidebook. And you don't need to come to Animus Valley Institute to go through this journey. It might go more effectively and faster if you had a guide, but you don't need it. The book has many stories of people who've gone through, Western people who've gone through the experience without any guide, without any understanding of what was going on for them. Carl Jung being one of the most famous examples. He had no idea what was going on. He was afraid at first he was just losing his mind, which he was in a good way. But he didn't know what was happening. He had no guide who knew what was happening. He had a companion, Tony Wolff, but he had no guide. Excuse me. He had inner guides, as it turns out. Elijah at first, and Salome, and later Philemon, and even others. And we all have inner guides. Okay, so what else here? Radical conclusions. One, of course, if I haven't already said it, is that I believe the vast majority of people in dominator societies get stuck in what a healthy culture would consider early adolescence. By which I don't mean our teen years. I mean the psychological stage that starts at puberty, and for most contemporary people, never ends. They die at whatever age they die at, still in early adolescence. And the reason for that is simply when a society loses its initiatory journeys, in particular the journey of soul initiation, then after a generation or two, there are no longer adults or elders, or there's not many of them. There's some, because some people go through the journey even without adults and elders to guide them. But there's not enough of them. And because of that, childhood becomes degraded. That the way I believe we raise children, even the way the mainstream in the Western world raises children is in such a way that it makes early adolescence a really, really difficult stage to ever get out of. I believe we humans evolved in such a way that we get kind of a free ride through early childhood and middle childhood and into early adolescence, that no matter how dysfunctional our society or family might be, we all get to the psychological stage of early adolescence if we're neurologically normal. But I believe we humans evolved in such a way that the next step in human development is relatively unlikely to happen unless you're in a culture that has created these their own version of the journey of soul initiation. So probably all of us are familiar with perspectives from in the Western world that says that claims that takes the perspective that there's very few true elders anymore in the Western world. There's olders and seniors, but that's not the same thing as an elder. But one of my radical conclusions that I've only seen in a few other places from a few other people is that there's actually very few true adults in dominator societies. Okay, so here's my definition of an adult. It comes in 3 parts. An adult, a true adult, is somebody who experiences their membership first and foremost as being in the larger Earth community. So that a true adult's greatest loyalty is to, you might say, their ecosystem. And they derive tremendous joy and fulfillment from all the other colorful aspects of their identity, like their ethnicity, their family, their religion, and so forth. But their deepest loyalty is to the larger ecosystem, or the more than human world, as David Abram puts it. So that's the first of 3 parts of the definition. So an adult is someone who's has a conscious primary rootedness in the more than human world, and they've had one or more conscious revelations or visions of their place in that world. That's what, remember, that's what I mean by soul encounter. And third, they have created one or more delivery systems for embodying that unique ecological niche or that mythopoetic identity as a gift to their people. So a true adult is somebody who's enhancing the life of their village and also their larger world through that. Okay. So the book, this new book is called The Journey of Soul Initiation, but it's primarily about one particular spiritual adventure that has to happen at least once during the journey of soul initiation. I call that the descent to soul. A descent to soul would take a minimum of a couple of weeks. Haven't ever seen one that fast. More typically several months, could be a year or more. It's a drawn out spiritual adventure during which there's all kinds of other things happening in a person's life. But here, let me connect a couple dots for you and say that the journey of soul initiation is essentially the stage of life after early adolescence. Okay? I call early adolescence the oasis. And my name for late adolescence is the cocoon. Not surprising for obvious reasons. And the cocoon stage is at least several years long. Shorter. It's on the shorter end of things if one has a guide and understands what's going on. And as I've said or implied, I believe only 10 or 15% of contemporary people in dominator societies ever reach the cocoon, which in a healthy society would be considered late adolescence. So in early adolescence, what we've done essentially, if we succeed at it, is we shaped consciously, we've created a social presence, a personality that has 2 attributes. It's both authentic and it's socially acceptable, at least to our peer group. And we have such a difficult time in the contemporary world with authenticity largely because of developmental deficits from childhood, due to being raised by people who weren't soul initiated adults and elders. And we have this great difficulty with authenticity, with discovering what are my true values. What do I live for? What would I even die for? What are my true interests? What's my personal style socially? What about my sexuality and gender identification? What's really me? What brings me alive socially and vocationally? these are all questions of early adolescent authenticity. And we have so much trouble with it, that's why we get stuck. And we end up with basically a conformist society, based on a lot of competition. Competition being an instance, an over focus on like almost violent competition is an attribute of an unhealthy early adolescence. Okay, so what I want to talk about here, next 10 minutes, is the descent to soul, which is what the book is primarily about. It's a spiritual adventure that has to happen at least once during the journey of soul initiation for it to be complete. And it can happen more than once, and it can happen after the journey, which is to say it can happen in adulthood as well. I haven't found any good examples of it happening in true elderhood, but it does happen. So the descent to soul is a journey, a spiritual adventure in which we go into the depths consciously of the unconscious. And I call it a journey into Soul Canyon. I'm going to try to share with you my screen. Here it is. Do you see that? Yes. The soul, it's the image of Soul Canyon. There's 5 phases of the descent to soul. We start here on the left, preparation, and move through dissolution is the actual descent into the depths. Soul encounters what happens in the depths. Metamorphosis is coming up the other side of the canyon, and enactment is when we get back to the top. So these are the 5 phases. Those of you familiar with rites of passage and the hero's journey will see differences here. So in our work at Animist Valley Institute, we always use nature as our template for example, for the stages of human development, and also for the aspects or parts, if you will, or facets of the human psyche, which I describe in my book, Wild Mind. And here I'm using Soul Canyon as a nature metaphor, but the other one we use as well is the experience of caterpillars in both moth and butterfly species. So I'll go through both here simultaneously with you. For a caterpillar who's beginning the process of transforming into a butterfly or a moth, there's this preparation phase. And essentially, for the caterpillar, it is, if it's a moth caterpillar, it's going to weave its own, or spin its own cocoon. And who knows if the caterpillar knows what this cocoon is for and what's going to happen in it. And for a butterfly caterpillar, the caterpillar's own body turns into something like a cocoon, which of course is called a chrysalis. So that's the preparation. For us humans, the preparation is, there's many dimensions of the preparation, the psycho-spiritual preparation. And there's a couple chapters in the new book on that. Let me just say very briefly, the preparation includes addressing any major developmental deficits from childhood and early adolescence. Remember, when the descent to soul is happening, it's not early adolescence. It can't happen then. It can't happen until late adolescence, of the cocoon stage. And also, to be prepared, we need to cultivate our 4 facets, what I call our 4 facets of human wholeness, described in detail in my book, Wild Mind, and summarized in the new book. And something you might be familiar with that's related to it is Carl Jung's notion of the 4 functions. What I call the 4 facets of wholeness are actually quite more complex than Jung's ideas. But developing cultivating our wholeness, central part of preparation, and also developing the skill of self-healing. is an important preparation. That's something that is very rarely learned in the Western world. And so this would be a good point to mention that the descent to soul is not a healing experience. It is not a therapeutic one. It is actually counter-therapeutic. And that this is one of the differences between what I call late adolescence and early adolescence, that we usually need quite a bit of healing. And that's the primary thing in some ways in early adolescence. We're never fully healed, no matter what stage of life we get to, but the descent to soul is not therapeutic. It's in the sense that it completely ruins the life we had been living. It completely wrecks the adaptation we had to our social and vocational life. It ruins any faith we ever had that we ever could identify ourselves again in any primary way in terms of a social role or a vocation or a discipline or a craft. And so it's a very major change in what we understand the world to be. Okay, so once the caterpillar is prepared, it seals itself up in the chrysalis or the cocoon, and you probably know what happens next. The caterpillar's body dissolves, literally dissolves into a soup. And for humans, what happens for us, it's not a change in our body, but it's a change in our identity, our way of understanding ourselves, as I was just discussing. So it's a complete loss. Sometimes it's called dismemberment. It's a complete loss of our former identity and our understanding of the world. And it can be quite a harrowing experience. And there's lots of practices that support a person in dissolution. And the book goes through quite a number of them. Then when we get to the bottom of Soul Canyon, for the caterpillar, this amazing biological thing happens. There are these cells that have always been in the caterpillar's body. They're kind of stowaways, and biologists call them imaginal cells. And the word imaginal here actually literally means, it's a biological term. It refers to the imago, which is biologist's term for an adult of this species, a butterfly or a moth. So the imaginal cells are imagining flight. And at this third phase of the descent, the imaginal cells wake up, they come out of hiding. And for us humans, that corresponds to the moment of soul encounter, that when we have that, that glimpse of the truth at the center of the image we were born with, which is to say, our mythopoetic identity. Okay, then the fourth phase, metamorphosis for the caterpillar, is when those imaginal cells, who are also architects, something like that, they start reshaping the recyclable material of the former caterpillar into the body of a butterfly, a very, very different creature. And for humans, metamorphosis is the phase where our ego gets reshaped. Because as I mentioned before, soul encounter is not primarily a download of information. In my new book, I give examples of soul encounters that had no information whatsoever, but experiences that were clearly soul encounters. And then the person begins to experience this process of metamorphosis that takes generally several months, if not years, depending again if you have a guide and practices that support metamorphosis. And then for the last phase of the descent is an enactment. And for the caterpillar, or now butterfly, this is when the cocoon is broken open, or the chrysalis, and the butterfly or the moth steps out, but it can't fly yet. What it first needs to do is hang out on a branch for some time and fill its wings with fluid so that the wings get some kind of structural integrity. And then the butterfly needs to flap its wings for a while, stretch its wings before it can actually fly. And then when it actually begins to fly, that's the beginning of adulthood. That's when true adulthood for a butterfly or moth begins. And it enters its life of pollinating and also reproduction, doesn't eat much. By the way, caterpillars are consumers. Butterflies are primarily pollinators and generators of the next generation. If you have a human society that's all caterpillars, too much consumption. Okay. So enactment for the human is when we start showing up in our social world as our mythopoetic identity, but it's before we even have a delivery system, but we just start, we do whatever we can to show up in that identity, and that helps the metamorphosis process continue and deepen. So I think it might be best to stop there. There's so many other topics I wanted to go into, but I'm partly depending on your questions that help us go to some of those places. But what I'm going to do is put a piece of music on for you. And it's an example of a calling song. And we'll have a 5-minute break while the music is on. But before you disappear, let me say that a calling song has to do with the beginning of the second phase of the descent to soul, which is the dissolution phase. That when we're going through preparation, it's like we're on the mesa and we're hiking towards the edge of the canyon. And we get to the edge of the canyon, a person has an experience of deep, deep longing. And maybe, we've always had before then a longing for some greater depth or meaning in our lives, but it really gets really intense on the edge of the canyon because we look down over the edge and we see that we're going to fall into this place and we're never going to be the same. And there's no guarantee, among other things, of survival. And so what enables us to take that step off the edge? And what it is this really, really, really deep longing. It's a soul level longing. And so there's something called calling songs that we find in various traditions. And there's two versions of calling songs. One is the soul is calling to us because there's this mystical marriage that is meant to happen between the ego and the soul. What the soul is in love with the ego because the ego can manifest things in the world and the soul cannot. And the ego is in love with the soul because the soul knows what is worth doing in life, and the ego does not. So they are calling to each other, one from the depths, one from the surface above the canyon. And the soul is singing its calling song to the ego, and it's so irresistible, we essentially jump. And the ego is singing its song to the soul. So I'm going to play for you an example of a calling song sung by the ego. This is a song called The Long Road, and it's written by Cliff Eberhardt. And if I can get this right, I'll even put the lyrics on the screen for you. And in this particular version of the song, Cliff Eberhardt is singing it with Richie Havens, a beautiful duet. And most everybody, I don't know anyone who hasn't heard this song who doesn't have a soul level resonance, and it just really vibrates with our longing for soul. I'd like to guide you on about a 5 or 10 minute imagination journey. So you'd want to get into a comfortable position, as comfortable as you can there, and probably would prefer to close your eyes. And I'm going to invite you to take yourself on a certain kind of journey. So perhaps begin by taking a few deep breaths. And while you're doing that, why not imagine that you're not just breathing in air, but that you're breathing in the sky, which, after all, that's pretty accurate. That's what we're doing. And you're breathing in the sky in whatever place you're in, whatever watershed, ecosystem you're in. And the sky is full of the breath of all kinds of other creatures. And if you'd like, you can imagine that your breath is not only filling your lungs, but filling your entire body, which it is, of course, ultimately through our lungs and our cardiovascular system. And that the sky is nourishing every cell of your body, which is actually exactly what's happening. So breathing in the sky. And with your exhales, you can allow to let go whatever is ready to leave your system without even having to name it. And then breathing in the sky again. And if you'd like, you can imagine that your body is like a seed that has been planted in moist soil, and that you're beginning to put roots down into the earth. You can imagine that if you'd like, your earth roots going down, seeking earth nourishment. And those roots, your earth roots, can draw up earth food, earth nourishment into your body and nourish every cell of your body through what you draw up through your roots. So every cell in your body is being fed by earth as well as sky. Sky and earth meeting everywhere inside of you, breathing in the sky, drawing up the earth. And now in your imagination, I want to invite you to go to the most mysterious, enchanted place you've ever been in wild nature. Or it could even be a place you've not been yet, but your muse might show you. And for extra credit, rather than choosing a place, you might just let your muse choose a place, maybe a place that you have been before in wild or semi-wild nature. It could even be a city park or a backyard, but some place outside of built walls that has been mysterious and enchanting to you. There's so many, of course, but let your muse choose one. And in your imagination, go to that place and be in that place. And open all your senses to what you see, the various shades of color, the things that are there, what you feel on your skin and with your belly, your felt sense, what it's like to be there. Opening your heart fully to this place, letting it have its effect again on you. Hearing what there is to be heard there, tasting what's on the wind, catching the scent of that place, the many scents. And both enjoying being there and letting that place have its way with you, have its effect again. Now I want to invite you in that place to allow yourself to feel and hear the call from your depths, the call of your soul. And let yourself have the emotional response to this call from the depths. And at the same time, you are also feeling the way that you call to your soul and how you express your longing for soul or for the marriage or merging with soul. And in your imagination, there may be some gestures that you make, which is your way of expressing your longing for soul, or certain postures you take, or a dance. There could be words that express that longing for soul, or a song, or perhaps a line of poetry, or tears, or a somatic experience of opening to this longing for the depths. And perhaps soul would express itself to you. It might be in something that you see in this place or hear. Or maybe you remember something from some time in your past that the soul wants you to remember. You might even remember something from your future. So let that channel grow as wide and as strong as you're willing, or maybe more so. And whether or not you can put it into words, let that feeling, that longing for soul and soul's call to you fill your experience right now. And perhaps you'll choose to carry that feeling and that longing in a particular place in your body. Your muse might suggest, hey, this place in your body would be a really good place to gather up and store this feeling, this experience. So it will always be with you so that you can access it anytime you want. So again, let me invite you to gather this experience up inside someplace in your body and start preparing to come back to the webinar. And while you're doing that, I want to invite you or encourage you, if you can, go to some natural place, semi-wild, if you can, sometime in the next few days. And in that place, open your heart to this feeling of longing that's now stored in your body. And maybe there you would recite some love poems that you bring with you. Love poems to the one who's calling you. Letting this longing happen to you. Letting it possibly even tear you open or stretch your heart. If you want to take any brief notes, of course, or not brief, feel free to do that. And in a moment when he realizes it's the right moment, David has something for us.
Thank you so much, Bill. I'm actually just looking to see if I can find the very poem by Goethe, Selige Sehnsucht, which is the longing of the soul. I have a book here. I just need to find it in the Selige Sehnsucht 227. Yes, that's the one that has this very famous final stanza, which you quote. Und solange du das nicht hast, dieses stirb und werde, bist du nur ein trüber Gast auf der dunklen Erde. And this was often quoted by one of my mentors, Sir George Trevelyan. So long as you do not have this, die and become, you're only a dismal guest on the dark earth. And so this is all about transformation, and indeed the Flammentod, which is the death of the moth in the flame, comes into the first stanza. So if you, those of you who don't know it, do look that up. I'll put it into the chat. And well, that was a wonderful journey and disquisition explanation, Bill, and really coming very authentically from your own soul niche, as it were. And I felt myself that I've been concerned with authenticity, ever since I was a student studying existentialism, and so I've always been seeking that, and the voice of the soul, the voice of the spirit, the unique voice that each of us has, which if we don't express it, then it's a terrible regret when we're dying. And we've actually heard something like this from Karen Wyatt, who's talked about this, that really singing your own song, being who you are meant to be from the depths, is really, I think, to find your ecological niche, in the sense that you're talking about, and that feels good and right, and you'll know if you're on track, whichever part of the canyon you happen to be in. So we are now open for questions and comments.
Soul encounter is a profound experience, but there's lots of profound experiences in life. Even in the world of numinous, the realm of numinous experiences, not all of them are soul encounters. So it's a good question to ask, of these most profound experiences in my life, which, if any, have been soul encounters. So in my books, I've attempted to help people with kind of guidelines on exactly that question, because it's such an important question. In fact, let me make, before I read some of them or speak some of them to you, let me say that there's a kind of profound experience that happens during early adolescence that is often mistaken or confused for a soul encounter. Again, soul encounters happen in the cocoon, which corresponds to late adolescence, where early adolescence is the previous stage, of course. So using the caterpillar analogy, caterpillars go through profound experiences, transformational experiences, but they're not soul encounters, which is to say they're not the thing that happens in the cocoon or the chrysalis. It's not becoming a butterfly. And what, maybe most of you know this, that the caterpillars shed their skins several times. How many times depends on the species, perhaps. So you can imagine being a caterpillar and literally your skin being shed, and then you grow another somewhat larger one. A profound experience. not becoming a butterfly or a moth, however. And biologists call the skin shedding a molt. M-O-L-T, and probably if you're British, there's a U in there somewhere too. But a molting is a very different thing than a cocoon or chrysalis experience. For humans, in early adolescence, we go through, if we're having anywhere close to a healthy early adolescence, we go through what corresponds to moltings. And it's a change in our social identity or our work or our major creative project or our relationship or where we live. And these are very profound experiences. Your world has changed. And if you're having a relatively healthy early adolescence, then you're becoming more authentic through these changes. So, and Keith, I have absolutely no reason to believe that what you're talking about are moltings, but for everybody, I just wanted to make that distinction between a molting and a cocoon experience. Very different thing. Soul encounter happens during the cocoon stage. So here's just a few, it's actually page, 163 in the new book, The Journey of Soul Initiation. There's 12 examples of qualities of experiences that the more of these qualities the experience has, the more likely as it is a soul encounter. This isn't a checklist like you have to have all 12 or anything like that. These are the patterns that my colleagues and I have been observing over 40 years with soul encounters. So for example, well, the number one thing is that it's an experience that your ego is being rooted more deeply in soul, but sometimes it's hard to know at first. The first one here is that the experience reveals your foremost ecological contribution to the great scheme of things, the larger world. That your mythopoetic identity, as you were given it, not figured it out, of course, but that you're given it through the soul encounter experience. It tells you something about what your role is in life, but it's never, to repeat myself, in terms of a job or a social role or a creative project. It's metaphorical. Another very common pattern of soul encounters is that you feel it's way too big for you to live. And or if you were to actually live it, it would probably destroy you. So there's this combination of it's a blessing, you feel blessed, and you also feel violated, or you feel it's a burden. And you want to say back to mystery or soul, wow, that's an amazing thing to do, like weaving cocoons. Surely there are people in the world who need to be doing that kind of thing. Mm. But I couldn't possibly be one of them, could I? I mean, you must have got the wrong address when you came to my psyche with that image, because there's no way. So there's what I'm saying is one of the most common features is a rejection. No, that couldn't be me. Another one is a soul encounter doesn't simply identify what I call a soul power. It identifies our soul role, our LE, or our niche, or our function in the world. So one of the profound experiences that happens during the journey of soul initiation is coming to understand that we were born with certain soul powers. But that leaves the question, well, what are you supposed to do with it? And the answer is the soul encounter, which identifies your mythopoetic identity. Another one is soul encounters are often accompanied by synchronicities between outer and inner experiences. For example, being touched by a butterfly wing and at the same time hearing your true name. Maybe I'll stop there. But again, on page 163 of The Journey of Soul Initiation, you'll see about 9 other common features of soul encounters, which will help you get a sense if a certain profound experience you're thinking of is or is not a soul encounter. Oh, I'll add one. The ultimate would be confirmation of a soul encounter is two things: that it leads to your truly serving your people and the larger Earth community, and that service is accompanied by your greatest experience of fulfillment in this lifetime. So ultimately, a soul encounter is confirmed by what happens in the future as you embody it.
Thank you very much. I think that's a very full answer. Tuvi, you have a question you'd like to put.
First, thank you very much, Bill, for your wonderful presentations and journey. And first of all, I want to comment that you complement other aspects of the SMN. Every Sunday, we've got a wonderful meditations and journey with Peter Finnick. On the screen now is next to you, but in my screen. And with Peter Finnick, we're working on another level of what you call non-duality. That practically you don't have your own ego, you're part of the one universe, one whole. In your case, it's in some way, it's a little bit the opposite, because you have to find what is your own unique purpose, unique journey in this universe. And also you discuss not with yourself, because there's different entities. Even you differentiate between you and the soul speaking with you. So if the soul and you are two different entities. So I've got a few questions about this to understand a bit deeper. First of all, I enjoy very much your journey. And I believe that I know my purpose, etc. But it was very interesting to see it and to get the image through your journey. So thank you. But I tell you what is my question, first of all. My first question is, in order to understand what you're saying, you didn't explain at all what is your worldview, for example. When there is a solar purpose, is it part of something bigger? Who is dictate? If I meant in quotation dictate, what is your journey? Is it something, there is something bigger than us, or one that we are part of it, that we are just part of this journey or no? Is it myself or my soul dictated? Or is something that when I was born planned for me? Is it purpose not just for me, purpose of humanity, purpose of the universe? What is this purpose? So is it one entity, doesn't matter if you call it God or universe, who has got any purpose, we are part of it? All this I haven't heard from you, so it's not clear to me. This one question. And one comment. I'm also in Kabbalah, I'm sure that you heard about this. They're talking not just about soul, but they talk about 5 levels in addition to the body. I don't go to discuss all of them, but there is like it's called there is something that every animal has got, and there is something level. Each level is a upper level to the lower before until we got the body, and the upper level at the top is oneness. Okay. And when you discuss only about soul and me, so I want to understand both what is beyond the soul. Is soul is part of something bigger, and the purpose is something purpose of the universe. For myself, when I've done my own journey similar to what you discuss, I try to ask myself deeper, what is the purpose of the universe? What is the purpose of this creation? If there is a purpose here, if I can understand what can be my contribution to this purpose, and then I can see what is unique, my skills that I can help to contribute to this. This was my journey, both logical and inspiration together in order to find it. And I find that I'm a bridge between, and this is what the SMN is doing in some way, and the same part of the SMN is a bridge between the scientific world on the one hand and to the spiritual world. So the scientific, if you look at the organization, his journey is to be a bridge and to help on the one hand to enhance the science towards this journey. So it's not just a soul of a journey of a person, it's a journey of the organizations. So sorry for my
that's pretty
spin, but I want to understand a bit your journey and to understand what you see the really purpose of the universe and how all this is part of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Tuvi, for that question. And I'll confess, I probably didn't get all of it.
I'm sorry, my accent is also not American and not even the British. Sorry.
I love your accent, and I happen to have one of those brains that has a little bit of trouble with accents that are unlike mine. Sorry, but I got some of it, but I probably missed some of it as well. But I heard the last one for sure, about the question about the purpose of the universe.
Yes.
I have no idea.
Okay, so
it's go ahead.
but I think it's very important in order to find your own purpose, to see how your purpose is really contribute to the purpose of the universe. Otherwise, it can, how you know it's not illusion, even you think it's authentic, if you not see it as part of the purpose of the universe.
Right. Well, there are some things maybe I can say about that might be helpful. So just a reminder that I use the word soul as an ecological sense of our ecological niche. So it's a basic ecological principle that every species and every individual of every species, species come into being through evolution and individuals come into being through birth. But in both cases, species and individuals, we are created or birthed as a way to enhance life. That we know that it's a basic ecological principle that everything enhances life. That saying the survival of the fittest is a bit incorrect. It's really the survival of those that fit best. So that every species is gifting the other species in the habitat through its own life and through the way it lives its life. So we know that life or evolution is life enhancing, that life gets more complex and diverse as things go along. So one could look at that pattern and simply say, well, clearly the purpose of the universe is life enhancement or diversification or complexification, something like that. On Earth, we know empirically, yes, that's what's happening on Earth, except for this one really troubling apparent exception. And that, of course, is us. We are not only not life enhancing currently, we're not even life sustaining. We are clearly currently, and for some hundreds of years at least, a life destroying species. Well, that should be a really troubling fact and something that we need to take a really good look at. What's going on? Are we a mistake of some sort? In my book, I asked the question, did Gaia goof by evolving humans? And my answer briefly is not at all. Gaia took a big risk with us, but she didn't goof. She evolved a species with our particular kind of intelligence, not more intelligent than other species, but our particular kind with our unique mode of consciousness, maybe not quite unique, but at the very least unusual, which is conscious self-awareness, and our hands and our brains and so forth that are allow us to manifest what we can imagine. And so the story I tell is that Gaia or Earth evolved us because she wanted a conscious partner in evolution. And what makes us a partner is not our strategic rational minds, but our capacity for deep imagination. And if we just use our strategic minds, as we've been doing in the Western world for so long, what we end up creating has these nasty side effects of destroying life. But so one frame you could use for all of this is to say the human species is in the midst of its own initiation journey that started several thousands of years ago. And we've encountered a major initiatory challenge, which is how we're going to use this form of consciousness we have. And this, so it's often said that our greatest strength is also our greatest weakness. So our mode of consciousness is our greatest power, but if we don't use it well, if we don't learn how to operate with this mode of consciousness we have, it can have some really nasty side effects, which at this point in the human journey is getting close to the climax moment. You know, are we going to get through this initiation or not? If we don't learn how to be more fully human and to use our mode of consciousness more effectively, then there's two most likely results. One is extinction for us, as well as all the other millions of species that we're taking down, or all humans in survival mode, in contrast to something like 50% of humans now in survival mode. And if you're in survival mode, one of the things you don't have a privilege for is the journey of soul initiation. So my take is, no, Gaia didn't goof, but she created a species, us, that is on an initiatory journey. We're just learning. We're technologically so advanced, but we're just learning psychospiritually how to be human. And the half of spirituality that is actually most important is one that's been lost for so long.
Thank you.
So, yeah.
Thanks very much, Bill. Thank you, Tuvi. And Peter.
Bill, I very much enjoyed your talk. I thought that was absolutely excellent. And the descent into the canyon, I resonate with that. But there's one aspect of your talk which I didn't see, which I feel is important, is the place of love and the strength of love in the forming of relationships and bonds, and the strength of love in allowing you to enter into the deeper parts of nature as well as into the deeper parts of yourself. Could you say a little bit about that?
Yeah, thank you, Peter. What a beautiful question. So yes, well said. It's love that that motivates us and carries us on the journey. There's this, it's love for the world and love for our people. In essentially most directly love for our people, that there's this, the longing is a longing to participate, to belong, and to serve the world. That's what, it's something in all of us knows that's where our deepest fulfillment comes from. And what enables a person to go on that journey is that they have been loved in a very deep way by their family and their community. And that's, I think, part of what we've lost to some degree. Like, how do you really, there's a way that children and youth can be and are loved by true adults and elders that is missing to the extent the true adults and elders are missing. So for example, a parent who's an initiated adult experiences their own child first and foremost as a gift to the world, as this own unique autonomous being who's not here to serve me and my family first and foremost, but to serve the world. That raising children is a soul act, S-O-U-L, act of loving the world. I'm trying to make it a brief answer. And but what you'll see in the very last chapter, the coda of this new book, is I start that chapter with love, and in particular with Mary Oliver's question, or she says in one of her poems, there's only one question: how to love this world.
Beautiful.
And
Thank you very much.
You also referred to when we were going out into nature, we should take some love poems with us.
Yes, to take love poems that you would speak to soul. To express your longing for soul through poetry.
Let me just point out this other book connected with Goethe here, people. It's a book I often recommend. It's called Goethe and the Power of Rhythm by John Barnes. And it's a kind of thematic death rebirth account of Goethe's life and how he was able to reinvent himself even in his 70s. And we all ought to be able to reinvent ourselves as well. That would be my hope anyway. And so I'll just put it into the chat in a moment, but it is an extraordinary book. Before I just wind up and say a little bit about what's coming up, I just want to read to you, unfortunately it's English translation, but this is the Song of the Spirit over the Waters by Goethe. It's much better in German. So if you do read German and you've got this, then go and have another look at it in your German verse or your book of Goethe's poetry. The soul of man is like water. It comes from heaven, it rises to heaven and is bound to return back to the earth, alternating everlastingly. The pure jet streams from the high steep cliff, then entrancingly it turns to cloudy waves of vapor against the smooth rock, and gently received, it undulates, veiling everything and softly murmuring down to the valley. If rocks stand out against its descent, it foams angrily, step by step, down into the abyss. In the even bed, it steals through the valley meadows, and in the smooth lake, all the constellations joyously mirror their faces. The wind is the delightful lover of the wave. Wind mixes foaming combers from the ground swell. Soul of man, how like water you are. Fate of man, how like the wind. Seele des Menschen, wie gleichst du dem Wasser? Schicksal des Menschen, wie gleichst du dem Wind? It's a little bit the wrong way around for you, Bill, because it talks about the spirit, the soul coming down, but it does have this alternation to it, the alternation of the upper and the lower, and the journey and the connection between the ego and the soul and the spirit, these different levels of being, and that it is our kind of job to bring together. And I think that's one of the things you've done for us tonight, is to mirror this process back to us. And that was what's so beautiful, that they're giving us this exercise and then giving us a follow-up as well, that we need to go out into nature. I had a wonderful walk this afternoon with my dog, and I said to Marianne when we got back, the whole hill is coming alive with the green trees coming out and the cherry blossom and everything. It's just fantastic. But it is this alternating process, because in the autumn and the winter everything goes down, the roots into the roots, as you were doing with our exercise. And so I think this has given us a sense of certainly given me a sense of rhythm as well. And so I do highly recommend that you get hold of Bill's book. I'll just hold it up for you again, the Journey of Soul Initiation. So once again, Bill, our heartfelt thanks for your presence this evening. And I'm not sure whether I'm capable of actually unmuting everybody, because I haven't done this before, to say cheerio. You'll have to see if you can unmute yourselves. I think you are able to do that now. So thank you so much. Good night, everyone.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you.
Very much.
Thank you. Good night.